Hey there, and welcome to the Reclamation Room. I'm Ashana, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a space for women reclaiming themselves after narcissistic abuse. If you've ever felt like you were too much, not enough, or both at the same time, you're in the right place. I created this podcast because I know what it's like to lose yourself in overgiving, overperforming, and still wondering why it never felt like love. I've walked through trauma, toxic relationships, and the long road of self-reclamation, and I'm here to walk with you. In this podcast, we'll explore what it means to come home to yourself after the confusion and chaos of narcissistic abuse. Some episodes will be solo, others will include guest interviews. All of them will be honest, grounded, and deeply compassionate. So, whether you're just realizing what you've lived through, or you've been on this path and you're ready for the next layer of your healing, you are welcome here. This is not about perfection. This is about reclamation. Hey guys, we're back. We're here with Justin McSweeny, host of, is your podcast Illumin Life?
Yes, Illumin Life.
Illumin
Or
Life.
no. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. That's my website. What's my, IdeaCast.
Idea
Middle
Cast.
age is wonderful.
I thought it was quite profound that of all the matchmaker.fm, I was like, oh God, what have I gotten myself into looking for podcast guests? But I do a show primarily geared towards women, and you
Hmm.
are not one. So reaching out to you was
Yes.
a bit of an experience for me. And I think it's profound that you have things to share here. So I would like to just open it up, if that's okay, if you want to share a little bit about your story and who you are.
Okay. And I will respond to what you said by saying that I am grateful that you're opening up this space for me to be here speaking about things. And as you said, this is a show that's, aimed at or has a desire to be of use to women and helpful for women. And so I want to just say that I'm grateful for that, and I want to give it the respect that it deserves when we have this conversation. So I appreciate you letting me into this space. And to share a little bit of a background or a narrative about myself, I started a podcast about, I guess it was about a little over 4 years ago in 21, and I don't know if I had a real reason or purpose to start the podcast. I think having gone through a rather tumultuous experience personally, and that was about the 10th anniversary when I started my podcast, of having dealt with something in my life that was a physical ailment that really rocked my world. And I was asking some deep questions and looking for some big answers, in life and what's going on and, all the big stuff that we like to ask. And
Right.
so this show was a reflection, I think, of my curiosity and this ceaseless inquiry that this insatiable appetite for not knowledge and not to reify anything into any kind of truth, but more just asking better questions and, learning from people and taking that information in and just holding it gingerly and respecting it and just using it to exchange with other people. And so it's not that I'm prescribing anything or pontificating about anything. It's more that, wow, this is a great insight, and I'm going to weave it into a tapestry of ideas that I can use and hopefully be of benefit to others when I share those ideas that I've gotten from other folks. And to speak to the guests that I've had, my first guest was amazing, absolutely kind of a sad story, but an amazing human being. And her name was Terry Dillion, and she had ALS. And I met her at a meditation conference, and she was dying, and she wrote a book called No Pressure, No Diamonds as a kind of probably a cathartic experience for herself to share the journey that she had been on. And again, reconciling with memento mori, knowing that there was a date on the calendar for her. And
Wow.
yeah, and she was a therapist and a Buddhist practitioner. She was into Western Buddhism. And I don't want to say that in a diminishing kind of way, but just to put it into context and perspective. And her husband was a therapist as well. So this was a woman who was lensing an existential crisis through the lens of a therapist, and then having a husband partner that could be supportive of that. So I found that fascinating, and the book is
Yeah.
incredible. I read it all in about 2 days. It's not a huge book, but I just read it in 2 days, and I'm not a reader, but I just ate
Yeah.
that book up. uh and because it's so human, and it's very vulnerable, and it's telling. And so anyway, I had Terry on, and she was nonverbal at the time, and so we did the vocoder conversation. I emailed some questions, and then she got on her vocoder, which is done with the eyes, and you just pick, if like Stephen Hawking, he was a good
Yeah.
example, and there was that automatic voice. And so we did that, and that was amazing. And that was about a half an hour. And then her husband and she came on. She looked gorgeous and radiant, and she was there, but I had the dialogue with her husband, and that was just really a great way to start my show. And I had the audacity to reach out to people in academia. I'm not an educated person, but I would reach out to people who I just really fell in love with their work and was fascinated. And it's mostly around philosophy and psychology and cognitive science and things like that. Things that, what makes a human tick and why what are we
Yeah.
doing and all these, right? And I was like, so I'm total fanboy, like, would you please, and some people ignored me, but other people were like, yeah, sure. And I was like, oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think I've done almost 150 conversations in the 4 years. I think I've got a few in the stable right now that I haven't released or uploaded or anything. And I think I'm at 146. So I know I'm probably over 150. And I have, I think more in the pipeline. So it's just an ongoing process. I don't derive any revenue from it. I wouldn't, for myself, I just want to make it a hobby, and just something I do because I learn from it. So I think that's my reward or my payment for it, is
Yep.
to just be enriched by people. In fact, I have a guy coming up in a couple of days. I have a guy who's a therapist, and he was an English major or a literary, got his degree in literature. And so he's also a psychotherapist. He got his degree in psychology, I guess, and or licensed clinical social worker. I don't know him well enough yet, but I'm reading his book, and it's fascinating because he uses narrative and the mechanism of literature to kind of suss out what we do when we are narrative creatures and we're struggling with something, when we have ghosts of our past or nebulous threats of the future. And he allows us to explore therapy through the lens of narrative and
Yeah.
discourse, and these tools of literature are coming to the fore through his
Hmm.
practice. So meeting people like that and getting these just new, again, threads for a tapestry or facets on a diamond, whatever the metaphor, is just so enriching. And again, having it delivered to an audience is
Hmm.
great. And that's one of the reasons I reach out to folks like yourself and say, would you mind if I came on and talked? And because I'll share, it's not about me at all. It's just sharing
Hmm.
this information that so many amazing people have passed along. And I will say, since this is a women's oriented show, I'd say 60 to 70% of my guests have been women. And it's just partly by design because I
Yeah.
want to elevate women's voices and make sure that they have a platform. It's not that they need me. It's just that if I can be one little motive,
Right.
one mode or one show that can do it, that's great. That's even better, to me. But I certainly don't make that a criteria. It's just I tend to reach out to women and get their ideas out there. So yeah, so I think that's so to give a personal background, I live in Florida. I'm married and have a cat, as you saw earlier. I have a little kitty cat, and that's about it. I have a passion for plants and botany and horticulture. That's kind of my pastime thing that I do to stay sane. Just go out and talk to my plants and be with them and stuff. So I have a back yard full of plants, fruit trees and palms. I live in, in
Wow.
Florida, so I can grow all kinds of wacky stuff. So in fact, it's mango season right now, so I'm in my glory. We're just bringing mangoes in and munching on them, giving away to my coworkers at work so they can have some. So, anyway, that's probably a good thing for me, to speak to who I am. Is I just uh, happy to have a few things of interest in life, like again, botany and doing those kind of things, and then again, speaking to people in these really interesting places in life.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that you do offer your platform for women's voices, and I feel that's even more powerful with where we're at right now. This will be released to my platform, and of course, you'll
Okay.
have the opportunity to share to yours. But just in listening to you, I'm getting these like pings. As I listen, I get excited and I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, oh, cool. Especially your friend that's coming on the 10th. And you said her name was Terry. Her story is amazing, and just remembering what it felt like just a few years ago for me to like really want that relational anything,
Hmm.
but to that point, I had isolated myself in this place of fear of trusting anyone. And so I think it's really beautiful that my listeners are, at various points on the journey, they may still be wondering if they can trust others. They may be timidly trusting others and wondering if they can
Hmm.
trust their own intuition. But just a reminder that there are so many voices, there are so many stories, there are safe places, and it is okay to put yourself out there and share that because it is a tapestry. And I just want to, honor gratitude and thank you for offering that space to women as well. That's very important.
Yes, yes. open that up just a little bit more, I think beyond those who are well accomplished in academia, I've spoken again, some of these, the women guests that I've had are professors in universities and published authors and professionals. But I think some of the most powerful and impactful guests that I've had are women who've come on who have faced terrible adversity, and they have a story of the hero's journey. They have a story of the wounded warrior and the survivor. And I call them alchemists, and they convert that into such power, and to platform that and to get that out into the commons, into the public and to the ears of women who are, as you said, they're in various stages of the journey. We might just be coming out of the injurious period, the period where things are happening that are not good, or we're in that liminal space of reflection and repair, and or we're out where, like I said, when I can find people, men too, but women who can say, and can I speak to sort of upsetting things, like
Yeah.
there are women who've dealt with violence, sexual violence, and so if you don't mind my saying that, and they're not ashamed at all, and they're not afraid. They just come out and say, look, I was molested as a child. And again, I'm sorry if that's
No,
upsetting to
that's
say
okay.
that, but they will say that without any hesitation because they know they've been through the fire, and they say, look, I'm not afraid anymore. And so, and there shouldn't be any stigma for that. So, but they come out, and so that opens up salience for other people who are like ashamed or mortified, and they want to bury that. And so just opening those layers of communication as you're doing with some of the work that you do, just speaks to power, and that's, I think, essential. I think if there's one universal thing about people or persons in the world is that when we see ourselves in someone else and they are empowered and they are overcoming or they have overcome, that's just so enlightening and refreshing and inspiring and all these things. So yeah, I've had some of those people on, and I'm just like, wow, it's just to be able to speak with them and get their story out is a gift, for the world.
Yeah. Humbling and an honor.
Yeah, absolutely.
The archetypes you bring up, I feel that's very important because there's so many pieces to each person. And like you said, we're in different stages and we may reflect and we may, resonate with some things now and then come back and pick it up later. Oh
Hmm.
gosh, now I'm in this part of my journey and that's okay too. So I did want to ask you, all these people, all these archetypes, all these warriors, all these creatives and alchemists, you've spoken to, I mean, you said 150 at this point. So I feel this would be a good question to ask you, especially in the way that you seem to be turning things over. And I feel there may be some patterns at play here. There may be some things about humanity that we can glean from this. So I'm wondering, these people who have been through difficult moments in their life, they're coming on, they're speaking, they're sharing. Are there any similar traits that you have seen in these people that you could speak to say, like, let's touch on this? Like, this is an aspect of humanity that needs to be lifted and brought to the surface.
Hmm. I think a common thread with again, I don't know if it's the embodiment of the wounded warrior that is the healed warrior, or just the alchemist, is that in their darkest hour, they were able to go within and find a reason for moving forward. When we're subjected to trauma or abuse or violence, well, the first instinct is fight or flight or freeze, right? But then the recovery part, the immediate aftermath of that is to withdraw and to
Mhm.
preserve. And so
Yeah.
you'll see that in catatonia. Some people are subjected to so much horror that they're just they're gone and there's not much there. And that's just a natural reaction. We're all capable of that. And in the short term, I think, maybe that is essential. I interviewed a woman who was a traumatologist, and she had a PhD. Yeah, she was a therapist, but
Wow.
she had her PhD in traumatology. And she would go into war zones right after the horrible boom, bombing and shells and guns and everything,
Yeah.
and go find people who were just had gone through the worst. And again, they're in that state. And
Hmm.
my heart broke for this woman because you could tell that after however many years she'd been doing it, that her stories, there was just a lot of pain and a lot of
Mm.
darkness there. And I think she sacrificed part of herself for that. She's, perfectly grounded, perfectly sane, stable human being.
Right.
I'm not saying that
Yeah.
she went beyond. It's just I could tell that she had gone out there and maybe left part of herself
Left a
there.
piece behind.
But this is not right for me to assess it. It's just me intuiting that
Right.
that to do that. And any soldier that's gone into combat, they leave part of themselves behind in those situations. I'm on a long tangent, but I think, when we are in that first immediate reaction to a horrific event, and horrific can be just psychological abuse, it can be
Hmm.
physical violence, it doesn't matter. If you've been negatively affected by that and you're feeling this, that I think the folks that I've talked to who have been able to be the alchemist and to do the catalyst process and convert that into a desire, a drive, a sense of purpose in
Purpose.
moving forward. Right, right. So they're on a precipice and they can say, I could stay in catatonia and withdraw and bury it, or I could become psychotic and enraged and vengeful, which is tempting.
We could.
We think about it a lot, right?
Yep.
And and then there's that sort of middle ground where you're like, yes, these are options, and I may have to dance with some of that.
Hmm.
I have to move from withdrawal, frozen, or rage. But then I think they see that there is a better future for themselves as they extricate themselves from
Hmm.
that. And I don't know what the magic sauce is in that. I'm not hip enough to understand what that is, that je ne sais quoi. But I think it's mostly a species of survival, like that. I don't want to be like this. I don't want to be held back or held down by all of the negative affect that comes from again violence or psychological abuse or anything like that. That
Right.
you want more for yourself. That you want to carry yourself into another expression of yourself, embody another archetypal role for yourself. You can embody the role of the healthy, functional, happy person, despite the history.
Right.
And we know folks, who labor with that because it's not easy, and it's a lot of that gets embedded in the subconscious. So we may on the surface or the superficially think, oh yeah, I'm elevating, I'm moving forward and transforming, but sometimes
Love
you
and
know
light.
Right, right, right. We could go as far as that, right? Where they're just
Yeah.
bypassing and things like that. So I guess maybe the sum of the special sauce is to have a moment of introspection and say, well, who am I? What am I made of? What is my person? We know what our being is. It's the body. It's the constituency of our physical living self. But
Right.
really to dive into the identity of who we are, especially after a disruption has occurred, whether it
Hmm.
was chronic over periods of months, years, or a sudden acute, to use
Yep.
medical stuff, kind of trauma, it may be a door opening for us to say, well, what am I made of? Who am I? And it's hard to do in those first moments, that nascent process of recovering or reacting to a
It
bad thing.
is.
So I'm dancing around a lot, but I think those folks that have made it to where they are, let's just say they're not in perfection. Like
Right.
I'm doing that journey, and I know and I love being flawed. I love being imperfect. Yeah, I don't, it's not about any kind of arrival into some
Right.
tainted, I'm levitating,
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful to be messy and sloppy and flawed. And we look to sometimes to gurus who are like, oh no, I've transcended and I've moved beyond. And it's like, no, I think it's better to be a little sloppy, a little irregular,
Yep.
a little flawed, and you give yourself so much latitude in that. You can say, look, man, this is me, and
Yes. And
I'm all
grace
these
comes with
things.
that.
Right. Yeah.
Compassion.
I am all these things. I follow one guy, and in fact, I interviewed him, and oh my gosh, talk about a like, oh, not worthy moment. He's a cog sci professor in Toronto, and he does, it's an embodiment process. So the archetypal roles that we've been referring to, you can embody the fool, you can embody the sage, you can embody the sinner, you can embody so many things. And
Right.
if you have that self-awareness to know that fluidity exists, that you're not supposed to be this one rigid person day in and day out,
Mm-hmm.
especially again with adversity or elation. You move through those things as a fluid person, again with your identity and your self-making and your sense of who you may be as a person.
Yeah.
If you afford yourself that flexibility and that fluidity, it makes it a lot easier, right? And that's not easy to do, but it's a thought,
No.
to work with.
It's not easy. And just, thinking back with like my coping mechanisms in the midst of trauma, that was like something I had to specialize in is like, going from foster home to foster home, being the new kid in many
Mm,
situations. It was a coping mechanism of sorts. And so my point in this is I look back and some part of me may want to detach from that little girl. And so I look at these, these gurus or these academic people. I love that you interview people who like, he's a cog psych guy. Like we can listen to him and then we
Hmm.
can sit with it and see how it feels and how it fits for us because when I come to that place of safety, I don't have to shy away from, oh gosh, I can't change who I am anymore. Like that wasn't safe. And I can come to a place of actually, I can change who I am in that moment and who I'm showing up as in that moment. And that is safe. And I think that that was really important what you shared because there are so many different things that we can do when we're on this journey. And some women, some people, not just women, but speaking to my listeners here, deep breaths may not work for everyone. Sometimes
Yeah,
we have to outsmart ourselves. So I
right.
think that was great. And you said something really important too, building a better future for themselves. These people believed in something greater for themselves. And it's like that's
Yeah,
it right there. Holy shit. Because
yeah.
if we're stagnant, that better future is not coming. And over time, we believe in it less and less and less because we believe in our ability to achieve it less. So I think, again, reiterating why it's so important that we have these conversations is like people may not even realize they're stagnant at some point. And then they hear something and they're like, oh my gosh, a spark of passion, a spark of. So I love everything that you've shared so far. This has been really insightful. Thank you.
Well, of course, of course. When you were speaking, it occurred to me that there's a good book. I did the audio book, and it was Viktor Frankl. I think it's Man's,
And
yeah,
search for
for
meaning.
Meaning. Right. That's a good read to give you if you have to start somewhere, let's just say where somebody in the audience has endured systematic abuse. They've,
Mm,
their esteem level is low, and they just don't have the zhuzh to get them going. And I think something like that, listening to that audiobook gave me some really good insights and some good
mm,
perspective because he was to give a thumbnail of the book. It's basically if you have a sense of meaning in your life or even purpose in your life that you will endure. This man was in a concentration camp and he held on to a couple of notions of meaning and purpose that got him through and allowed him to integrate from hellscape to normal world with that vision and that clarity and that perspective. So that's a good place to go is to check out that audiobook. And some of it, it's a heavy book, but I think it's really inspiring in terms of. And Frankel was he was an existentialist, so he
mhm.
wasn't full of Mary Poppins and
Yep.
unicorns and pixie dust. He was just very frank,
He was very
Frankel.
grounded, I think, in the things
Yeah,
that he
just a
shared.
indeed a very pragmatic person. So, yeah, that's a nice one if you want to recommend if someone in the audience is like, well, where do I start?
And that's a short
Um,
read too. Even if you're
it is.
listening, it wouldn't be that long.
No, no. I think I did the audiobook in like maybe 2 days, 3 days,
Yeah.
an hour here, an hour there. Maybe I can't even remember how long. It was a few hours, so it wasn't that bad. But well worth it. Well worth it. I consider any pursuit that we engage with to be a kind of onboarding of virtual tools and machinery that we can use to move us out of any mire that we think we're in, or it's not going to hurt if you get that extra insight because honestly, and this, there's times when we're like, what? Where do I start or what do I do? Any of us that have done this kind of self-care,
Yep.
it can be what? Fog, it's like you're just not able to lens things. And that's where the others can come in and help. And that's why I call it like a virtual utility or machinery that someone else's ideas can get into your head. And you're like, oh, good, because their perspective kind of push some of the fog out of the way, and now my lens is, I'm seeing things a little bit better. So that's what
Yeah.
we're all here for, right?
Well, if it's okay, and I love that book, by the way. I'm so glad that you said that.
Yeah,
Oh,
it was
such a good
good.
book.
It's one to digest, one to consume.
It is. I remember when I first read it, I kept having to kind of set it down and just take a second because I was really resonating with what these people were going through in this concentration camp. I kind
Hmm.
of gaslit myself at first. I was like, "Oh, come on. Like it wasn't that
Right,
bad
right.
what you went through. Like come on, these people." But there's one specific passage I remember where he was describing how the soldiers would treat the people in the camps. And the word that really stood out to me was dehumanizing.
Hmm.
And I was like, that's it. Like, that is
Yeah.
exactly why this is resonating because of what I had gone through as a child. There was finally a word for it. And I think it's important not to put it on a spectrum of theirs is worse than mine because no, I wasn't in a concentration camp, but that was something that could give me a lens of like, oh, that's why that felt that way. So,
Yeah. No, that's one gift through time that they can give to you for the horror that they went through is it's not about comparison, it's not about scale, it's none of that because if you felt one modicum of torment and you know you talk about gaslighting, it's a favorite trick of sociopaths and narcs and people who are in putting persons in these terrible positions. So again, talk about salience is to say I recognize that. This is what my tormentor did. This is what my narc did, or
yeah.
you know, the sociopath that happened to come into my life. And so again, that recognition and that familiarity, and then knowing that another human being had that experience, and again, through I like to use metaphors like through time, they're handing that story off to you and saying, you know, let my suffering be have further purpose, right? You know,
Yeah.
what they endured, what anyone in a hellscape endured, could be things for us to whatever caveats for future or just recognizing, like you said, you don't need to gaslight yourself, or if you
Yeah.
are, say, hold on, you know, that
Yeah.
that it's right. Yeah, it's that you can
And even if you don't
appreciate for
learn from
yourself.
something, even if you don't learn from it, sometimes it's just like, hey, same.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
see you. Um, so if it's okay, I would like to ask a little bit about what I guess kind of the hellscape that you lived through.
Yeah. And it's good timing because the person that I dealt with, let me put a disclaimer out there that anything I say about this person is not said in any kind of malice or ill will. I will try to be as objective and from my perspective, honest as I can be without embellishing anything. So I just want to afford them, they're still alive, and I want to afford them some respect because despite what I'm going to share, they did the best they could. So I just want to put that caveat in there. So my maternal parent would say things, you talk about the gaslighting, and they suffered a terrible childhood. They were abused, probably raped, God knows what,
Mm,
just terrible things. And in hindsight, I wish they hadn't had children because neither of my parents were equipped for that. My father recovered and because he was abused as a child and basically married his mother, who was, a domineering, abusive, yada yada. But that's one of the things that this maternal parent would say is, you don't know what suffering is. And all that kind of stuff, right? They throw that at you when you're like, like
yep.
little child, and they just, unleash their psychosis. You don't know what suffering is, and it's like, okay. And honestly, like I knew their parents. I knew that woman's parents, and they were it's just like demons incarnate. They're dead now, so I can say that. And I have no love lost for them. They were nasty customers. I'll share a
Mm,
little insight about her father was in World War II. He was an Army intelligence officer, and his job was to torture SS officers, which are like so the
oh my
hardest people on the
gosh.
planet, vicious, nasty people. And he had a Comanche Indian as his bad cop. He was good cop. And he'd walk into an interrogation room and say, "Listen, I've got a full-blooded Comanche Indian in the next room, and he doesn't like white people, and he is going to cut you into little pieces. And forget the Geneva Convention, right? He's
Oh
going
my
to carve
gosh.
you up unless you start sharing some information." And that was the kind of mind that this person had. And of course, the Comanche would, do what he enjoyed,
Did what he
uh,
did.
did what he did. In fact, on his time off, he'd sneak behind the lines and kill white people, Germans.
Oh my gosh.
I gotta hand it to him. I mean, I understand. I get your anger. But anyway, this is the father that raised my maternal parent, right? This
Right.
this and I would get that treatment as a child in their home. He would go into drill sergeant mode and start barking and shrieking and like I was in boot camp and I'm like 5, 6 years old and I'm like
Oh my God.
like making the table, like R. Lee Ermey kind of stuff, just going nuts. So the guy was a real and his wife, my maternal parents' mother was really, you know, um, high order sociopath. Like they were both very Machiavellian, very disturbed people. And anyway, so this poor woman that raised me had to come out of that environment. And so that she wasn't worse is a miracle or a blessing for me because I didn't endure a lot of physical violence, but mostly stuff, psychodramas and anger pageants and these kind of weird cyclical things. As an adult, I recognized it was just a repetitious pattern of them kind of not really having catharsis because that would be great. I'd be willing to be a punching bag for catharsis, but just sort of in that cyclical order of, wash, rinse, repeat, wash, rinse, repeat, wash, rinse, repeat. And so that was the norm growing up. And my poor father, he he left when I was 6, and bless his heart, I'm glad he got away because he was the abused spouse. There was a lot of anger and violence in the home. So he got
Mm.
out when I was 6 years old in the mid 70s. And I was actually relieved at 6 to see that happen. So fortunately or
Relief for
unfortunately
him.
for him, well, no, for all of us, I think, because the fighting was just so
Okay.
it
Okay.
was bad, and at six
Right.
years old, I was hip to the fact that this is not right.
Right.
This is there was violence and things like that. So what's interesting is I was kind of blind. I had blind spots to, maybe the pathologies that were going on because to me it was normal. You have a
Yeah.
mother, a somewhat nuclear family because my father stuck around and he was a weekend parent, and paid child support so that, we had food and things. And again, to this maternal parent's credit, that woman worked hard to make sure that there was a home, that there was food and clothing. They were concerned about my education, even though I was deeply dyslexic and education was a nightmare, which was a friction point, of course. I got terrible
Yeah.
grades and used to and they didn't know what was wrong with me. So that was kind of a fuel to the fire kind of situation. Anywho, I came out into adolescence and teenage years, kind of a depressive, kind of just not really comfortable in my skin, very
Mm.
nihilistic, very self-destructive, because all of that rage and anger and all the head games and the psychodramas and stuff, they're all inside. And so it manifests as self-medicating, a lot of drug use. But that was teenage partying in the 80s,
Yep.
right? No. Yeah, it's like it was pretty heavy duty. But we called it that. And but very self-destruct. I did some incredibly stupid things that could have gotten me killed. It just I didn't care. If
Yeah.
something went wrong and I died, it didn't really matter at that time. So I'd say by the time I got in my early to mid 20s, I kind of straightened myself out a little bit and cleared my head out a little bit, and had, a fairly normal, somewhat functional life at that point. Got married at 28. Wasn't till my mid to late 30s that the shadowy stuff started to come back out again because I was a workaholic. We had a couple of businesses. I worked 7 days a week. I worked 7 days a week for years,
Yeah.
from mid 20s. So that was one self-medicating thing, was just to stay busy and make a little money, but it's just,
Yeah.
not have
No time to
time.
focus on anything else.
Right. No downtime, no me time, hedonistic recreation. We'd go and do things and have fun and lots of beer and stuff like that. So anyway, but yeah, late 30s coincides with this time of my being very physically ill that I had mentioned earlier. And that was the pause for reflection kind of thing,
Mm.
stand on the precipice. Because some of it was self-inflicted and some of it was a chemical brain injury that I had endured or had incurred rather from probably some toxic mold in my house. The partying and everything like that, I don't think there was a whole lot correlated to that injury. So in other words, I drank a little beer, smoked a little grass, things like that. By the time I was in my late 30s, I wasn't quite the party animal that I was when I was younger. And I just say that for context that I think whatever this mold sickness or whatever happened to me, just shut me down really
Mhm.
badly. And left me with some choices. Like, do you want to be, because but right before I got sick, fittingly, I was a very angry person. I'd owned a couple of businesses. I didn't feel like I was successful enough. I didn't feel like all my efforts were being rewarded, yada, yada, yada. So, poor me, angry. And bless my wife's heart, she went along for the ride. And I'd like to think that despite my being dysfunctional, we had a good relationship. We still do. We've been married 27 years, or what is this, 25? No, we've been 26 years we've been married. And we have been growing together. And,
Mm.
so fortunately, my dysfunction didn't negatively impact my spouse. And she had been married to an abuser before me. And
Mm.
so I try to be an empathetic and sensitive person to people I
Right.
care about, and she's about the only human being I care about to the degree that I do. So there's a sense of like, no go, don't project your crap onto this person. So I'd like to think I get at least a B or a B minus for that one. And now that I'm on the other side of a lot of things, I try to make sure that I show up as a good partner
I
for
feel
her.
like 26 years at least is an A minus. I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, and the reason I know I'm not doing too bad is she had been married, like I said, to an abusive male prior, and pretty
Yeah.
much swore off ever getting married again. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, we managed to take that leap, and so I think that speaks a little bit to both of us working to
Yeah.
make sure that we show up for each other. So got through the physical thing, took several years. I had been pretty much a mental vegetable because of this toxicity and whatever happened in my brain. I couldn't understand people speaking. I couldn't really form sentences very well. I couldn't walk very well. Short-term memory was nothing. I could remember older, past long-term memory type stuff, but short-term I wasn't really registering much. So it was spooky. And like I said,
Yeah.
that was I always call it the master that showed up. It was a great teaching moment for me because I could be this crappy, dysfunctional, toxic, angry, yada yada, lots of demons inside. Or I could start to straighten up the mess and clean up my house a little bit, the metaphoric
So
house of me.
were you still like cognitively aware of everything and just struggled to communicate that?
Yeah, I was locked in a little bit, yeah. And what was weird, I would have these waves of, I can't describe somatically or psychosomatically what they were, but that was horrifying because it felt like I was losing my grip on reality. And so I have to qualify that because I think people who do truly fall into psychosis aren't aware that they've fallen into, but I was
Yeah.
aware that like
Yeah.
my ability to function and maintain my composure as a human being was just washing over me and like terrified me. I
That's
could be sitting on the couch.
terrifying.
Yeah, because I'd be sitting on the couch and this wave would come over me. And it was like I was just going to fall apart and not have control of my faculties anymore and just be a babbling vegetable, And I was like horrified that, because that's our egos at stake there because, I would probably have to go to a nursing home if I really did fall out that hard and have people feed me and clothe me and bathe me and all that kind of stuff at 41, and I'm like, yes, I was like, don't
Oh
do
my
that. You can't
gosh.
fall apart. Right? Anyway, good, happy ending though. Here I am.
Yeah.
That was 2011, so this is 2025. So 14 years later, most of my faculties are back. As you can tell, I can form sentences and speak, and I can remember. Most of it's back. There's just this thin haze over me right now. I always describe it as like a bad cold medicine, kind of like when you drink a cold medicine or a Sudafed or something, you just get a little foggy. That's
Yeah.
kind of where I'm at, but I don't notice it. I don't pay attention to it. And as long as I can think and function and, do my normal stuff, I don't, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I'm good.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. But it was such a in hindsight, wonderful gift that I got from whatever the world, from experience, because it straightened me the heck out. It straightened my rear end right out because none of that previous grudgy, chip on the shoulder, angry stuff is there as it was. It may have, we talked about alchemy earlier, it may have morphed into other types of sort of curmudgeony,
Hmm.
cynical, as I said at another point earlier, I'm flawed. I'm messy and I know my demons are still there, but I name them and we get along and I let them out, right? So this is Jungian stuff where we do shadow work and we get our things out on the table so that we don't
Right.
stuff it down. So I'm aware that I have to practice and exercise that, and I try to do it as healthfully as possible. But sometimes I expose myself to terrible things to just remind myself of how good my life is.
You
So
mean this
anyway,
by like conversing with people who have been through terrible
yeah,
things?
or just watching something really horrible on YouTube, like a state attorney general will release a fatal accident involving a police chase or something, and you just see what people go through, and I'm like, oh my God,
Okay.
I hurt myself. I watch that, and it's traumatic, and I'm like, and this isn't healthy. I'm not prescribing this to anyone, but it shocks me back into myself. Like
Yeah.
when I was in my 20s, I used to listen to a lot of industrial noise or death metal and stuff like that. And some of those bands, that's their point. They're there to shock you and to make
Hmm.
social statements like vivisection is bad or misogyny is bad, and they would exemplify that in this, not
This
quite
assault
cartoon.
on your senses.
Right. They would use viscera and
Yeah.
gore and things like that to get your attention, right? And say,
Yeah.
this is not good. This is not good. So that's
Mm,
kind of I grew up with that kind of medicine. And so
yeah.
I don't
It's
suggest it for
interesting.
anyone else. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. Anyway, but I say that to people in the audience because it's not about being a wonderful, enlightened, or awakened person. It's about being that sometimes, but also being, as we were saying, just allowing yourself the space to be messy and disordered. And if you have a bad day, don't hold it against yourself, because we all feel it. So just let it out. But let it out, when we talk about doing Jungian shadow work, do it in a safe space, do it in a controlled space. Again, death metal. Yeah, for me, I put something really awful and aggressive on, and I'm like, "Rrr," and like a minute and a half later, I'm like, whew, I'm
I feel
spent.
so
I'm
much
good.
better.
I'm good, and I don't take the lyrics seriously. I mean, they're saying terrible things on the
Yeah.
lyrics, but it's the aggression, and I'm a guy, and I'm on a women's show, so like I said, I don't maybe try it because there's a lot of women who listen to to speed metal and death metal. But for me, it's just 3 minutes of catharsis. I'm like, "Brr," and then I'm like,
Yeah.
and I feel good, and then I can go about my day. So whatever works for you. But there's so many. There's qigong and tai chi, and there's mindfulness and contemplative practices. There's walks in nature, so you don't have to put
Yeah.
on like Cannibal Corpse just to get to your happy place.
I'll go do
It's
a really
something.
hard workout. So sometimes it can
Yeah,
border on go punish your
yeah. And
muscles for a minute.
right, right. And you could put your Metallica on when you're doing aerobics. I mean, that's great because that's energy. That's just rah,
Yeah.
rah, rah. So whatever your jazz is, as long as it's to a positive end, a positive affect or a positively valent end, that's the
Yeah.
important thing. So anywho, yeah, so to summarize, yeah, just a dysfunctional childhood, dysfunctional
Mhm.
parents, went through various stages of self-abuse, neglect, anger, and what I would like to hope for myself in this sort of autumn of my life, I'm in my mid 50s now, is that I want for others that they not go through everything I went through or that the severity of what they go through. So if I can be a voice of that historicity of experience and say to somebody younger, not quite in an interventionist mode of action, but a kind of a friendly assistant, like I've been there, just like Viktor Frankl was like, hey guys, I've been there. And I got through a concentration camp, and I want you to feel safe to get through the abusive partner, the crazy mother, whatever it is that's throwing you off your equilibrium and denying you your due well-being in your life
Mhm.
is, that any contribution that I can make in that regard, I think is doing service to all of the Justins that came before me. The
Mhm.
30-year-old Justin, the 41-year-old, the 12-year-old, and
Yes.
all the, because I think about me as different stages and my heart breaks for some parts of me. And you have to, you have to look back on those elements of yourself and go, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I love you so much. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
absolutely.
gonna be okay. I see that 15-year-old me having a breakdown because my mother was a crazy woman. And I'm like, guy, you'll be all right. It's gonna be a little crazy, but you'll get through it. So anyway,
I'm
uh,
here.
yeah, I'm here with you. We're all
Okay.
here together, right?
Yeah.
We're all in this amalgamated composite of a human being, and we're good. And that kind of ties back into something we were saying earlier, if I can recall correctly, that when we do this, when we intend to do this work, it is to be more whole, it is to be complete. And that's a good analogy, is to say that there is every aspect of you from every moment of your life still in you. It's still functioning in you. And so when you can get them feeling good about themselves and feeling, and that's, what do they call it? Inner child work, all this
Inner
kind of
child,
stuff.
yeah. Or your
Yeah,
parts
exactly.
work.
Parts work, constellation
But
work,
it's
family therapy.
true. I mean,
It's
even
so
women
effective.
who I'm coaching today, it's like in those moments when you're extremely triggered and you've been through this betrayal trauma and you often feel abandoned. It's not just
Hmm.
you right now who's feeling that way. It's the culmination of all the times that you've felt that way. And it is heartbreaking. It
Yes.
is soul crushing. Like we've got to be with all of those versions of ourselves because even if we sit with this version of ourselves, what we're going through now, we still have the memory of all those other times. And it's like slapping a band-aid on something,
Hmm.
eventually that the crack is going to get bigger. You've got to go in and you've got to like, okay, what's causing this crack to get bigger and bigger,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
you mentioned with the anger and everything.
Yeah, yeah. And I think if you can go back retrospectively and connect with, I'll use my 15-year-old self, but if there's a woman in the audience and she's feeling shame about her 17-year-old self, try empathy, try pure openness and acceptance.
Yeah.
And as I would to my 15-year-old who was, I can remember vividly getting off a terrible phone call with my maternal parent, sitting down next to my father and just bawling because that woman wore me out about some trivial thing, but she just
Mm.
turned it into this grand Machiavellian inquisition. And it was like, my God, and my poor father, I could tell he felt it too because he'd been there so many times. So that's an instance that I go back in time and I say, dude, I'll sit next to him on the couch and I'll say, listen, you're fine. You're going to be okay. You're going to go through some bumps, but you're okay. So if there's a gal in the audience at 17, bad things happened, be there. Be there as a
Yeah.
loving, compassionate, inhabit the matriarch, inhabit the caring mother, and love that 17-year-old self,
Yeah.
and know that she is perfect. She is inviolate. She's just going through some stuff, and it's not necessarily her fault. Even if it was poor choices made by the 17-year-old, it's not. It's those poor choices were growth experiences, right?
Yeah.
Opportunities. So we can
Yeah.
put it into a lens or a perspective that doesn't rewrite the history, but it makes the history okay. It makes
Yeah.
that, there's no wrong way to human. Well, I mean, there are wrong ways to human, but when we are, I should, big asterisks there, there
Yeah.
are wrong ways to human. But when we're talking about vulnerability and recovery, there are no wrong ways to learn from that. Now, at 17, if you walked in, with a, hand grenade and said, "This is a stick up," then that's maybe not a good way to human, and
Maybe
maybe
a
we
wrong way to
should
human.
be a little critical about that part. Hopefully
Yeah.
you're beyond that. But anyway, with all that aside, if we're all just having those opportunities to self-reflect and introspect, that we do it with kid gloves, we do it with compassion. I don't at this stage of my life, because I used to beat myself up. Like when I was in my early 20s, I thought I was a complete abysmal failure because I didn't go to college. And I'm bright. I could have, but I was very dyslexic and very learning disabled, and just that whole standard, of education, the way they had it structured, it just
Yeah.
I didn't fit.
Yep.
And I beat myself up horribly, 21, 22 years old. I just felt terrible. I'm like, oh, what a loser, what a failure, blah, blah, blah. And to my credit, I was learning to be a chef. I was in culinary and doing Escoffier culinary and learning a trade and learning
That's
to do,
cool.
yeah, yeah. So here I am, but that's the negative self-talk where you're
Yeah.
defeating yourself. And so I got
Yep.
to go back to that person and say, look, guy, you did fine.
Yeah.
You're gonna be
You're
so.
going through some shit right now, and it is really hard. And I am here for you, and I love you. And also, you are okay. You are
Yeah,
safe. You're
yes.
not alone. I see you.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
hardest part sometimes is holding two truths. Like that was really shitty and it was really painful. And then having that next statement be, and you're also here and you're also
Hmm.
okay. And that's where you have to tell yourself, like, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Thanks for spending time in the Reclamation Room. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if this supported you, consider sharing it or leaving a review. You're not alone, and your reclamation is sacred.